Most people don't ruin their lives in one dramatic moment. It happens quietly. A few missed mornings. A few broken promises to themselves. A few years spent waiting for motivation to arrive. And one day, they wake up exhausted by a life they barely recognize. Not because they were lazy, not because they were stupid, but because they underestimated the power of small daily decisions. That's the part nobody warns you about. The terrifying truth is that your future is not built in giant moments of transformation. It is built in ordinary Tuesday afternoons, in tired evenings, in silent choices nobody sees. And by the time most people realize this, their energy is lower, their confidence is damaged, and time no longer feels unlimited. Because success was never hiding inside massive breakthroughs. It was hiding inside repetition, inside discipline, inside the things that felt too small to matter. And maybe that's why so many people suffer in silence. Because deep down, they know exactly what they should be doing. They just stop believing that small actions could still save their life. There's a specific kind of loneliness that appears in adulthood. Not the loneliness of physically being alone. The loneliness of carrying responsibilities while feeling emotionally disconnected from yourself. You go to work. You pay bills. You answer messages. You take care of people. You survive. But somewhere along the way, your inner world becomes quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. And what makes it dangerous is that nobody notices. From the outside, your life may look functional. But internally, something feels unfinished. You keep thinking, this can't be it. Not because your life is horrible, but because you remember who you once thought you could become. That memory haunts people more than failure ever does. The version of yourself that almost existed. The disciplined version. The confident version. The focused version. The version that was going to start next Monday. Years pass frighteningly fast when your life is built on postponement. That's why people suddenly wake up at 45, 50, even 60 years old with a strange ache in their chest. Not panic, regret. Because regret is rarely about massive mistakes. It's usually about small disciplines abandoned repeatedly over time. Jim Rohn once said, "Success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines, practiced every day." At first, it sounds almost too simple, almost disappointing. People expect success to feel dramatic, explosive, life-changing overnight. But real transformation is painfully quiet in the beginning. That's why most people quit before it changes them. Because daily discipline feels invisible at first. Nobody applauds you for waking up early 3 days in a row. Nobody celebrates when you stop wasting hours scrolling through distractions. Nobody notices when you choose self-control over emotional impulses. And that's exactly why discipline is difficult. The rewards are delayed. Human psychology struggles with delayed rewards. The brain wants immediate comfort, immediate relief, immediate pleasure. That's why people sabotage themselves while fully understanding the consequences. They are not weak. They are human. Behavioral psychology has shown repeatedly that people often choose short-term emotional comfort over long-term meaning, even when the long-term outcome matters deeply, especially when they are tired, emotionally drained, lonely, or overwhelmed. And modern life keeps people permanently exhausted. Constant stimulation, constant comparison, constant pressure. People are mentally overloaded, yet spiritually underfed. So they escape into entertainment, into distractions, into food, into alcohol, into endless scrolling, into pretending they'll start tomorrow. Not because they don't care about their future, but because temporary relief feels easier than confronting themselves. And slowly, discipline begins to feel impossible. Not physically impossible, emotionally impossible. There's something deeply painful about breaking promises to yourself repeatedly. Eventually, you stop trusting your own words. You say you'll wake up earlier. You don't. You say you'll exercise. You don't. You say you'll save money. You don't. You say you'll finally take control of your life. And again, nothing changes. People think this only affects productivity. It doesn't. It affects identity. Because every repeated action becomes evidence, and the brain quietly builds a self-image around that evidence. This is one of the hidden psychological truths most people never realize. Your habits are not just creating results. They are creating your identity. Every time you follow through on a discipline, even a tiny one, your mind receives a message. I am someone who keeps my word. And every time you abandon yourself, the opposite message grows stronger. Over time, this becomes dangerous, because eventually people stop aiming higher not because they lack ability, but because they no longer believe themselves. That loss of self-respect destroys more dreams than failure ever could. A man can survive exhaustion. He can survive rejection. He can survive hardship. But when he loses respect for himself, something inside him begins collapsing silently. That's why discipline is deeply emotional. It is not about productivity hacks. It is about rebuilding trust with yourself. Most people think discipline means intensity, but intensity is temporary. Identity is permanent. Anyone can feel motivated after watching a powerful video. Anyone can feel inspired for 2 days. But what happens on ordinary mornings? What happens when life becomes repetitive again? That is where character is revealed. Stoic philosophy understood something modern culture forgot. A meaningful life is built through repeated self-governance, not emotional chaos, not constant excitement. Self-governance, the ability to direct yourself even when feelings fluctuate, especially when feelings fluctuate, because feelings are unreliable narrators. Some mornings you will feel hopeful. Some mornings you will feel empty. Some mornings you will feel angry at your own life. Discipline teaches you to continue anyway. And strangely, that consistency begins healing parts of you that motivation never could. Because discipline creates evidence. Evidence creates confidence. And confidence changes behavior. Not fake confidence. Not loud confidence. Quiet confidence. The kind built from knowing. I can rely on myself now. That feeling changes a human being profoundly. There's another painful truth nobody likes discussing. Many adults are not actually exhausted from work. They are exhausted from internal resistance, from knowing what needs to change and avoiding it daily. That tension drains enormous emotional energy. You can feel it at night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything you should have done. People carry invisible guilt for years. Not because they're evil, because they abandoned their own potential. And the human spirit does not stay silent about that forever. It whispers, then nags, then aches, until eventually, life feels emotionally heavy even when nothing catastrophic has happened. This is why small disciplines matter so much psychologically. They reduce inner conflict. When your actions begin aligning with your deeper values, something inside you becomes calmer. Not easier, calmer. There's a difference. Your problems may still exist. Your responsibilities may still be overwhelming. But internally, you stop feeling divided against yourself. And that internal unity is powerful. Think about the people you admire most. Not celebrities, real people. The older man who carries himself with quiet dignity. The woman who remains calm during chaos. The person who seems emotionally grounded even after suffering deeply. Usually, their strength was not created through one heroic moment. It was built slowly, through repeated disciplines nobody saw. Waking up when they didn't want to. Controlling emotions when anger felt easier. Saving money while others wasted it. Choosing responsibility instead of excuses. Continuing after disappointment. Small disciplines, repeated daily. Over years, these disciplines become invisible architecture, and eventually, people call it wisdom. But wisdom is often just disciplined experience surviving long enough to mature. That realization changes everything, because it means transformation is still possible even if your life currently feels messy. You do not need a completely new life tomorrow. You need repeated direction, repeated correction, repeated alignment. That's all. The tragedy is that many people wait for emotional certainty before changing. But certainty rarely comes first. Action comes first, then clarity follows. This is one of the hardest lessons adulthood teaches. You do not think your way into a better life. You behave your way into one. And at first, the changes feel painfully small. You wake up earlier for 1 week. Nothing magical happens. You begin exercising. Your life still feels difficult. You stop wasting money impulsively. Your stress doesn't disappear overnight. So the brain says, "See, it's pointless." But what the brain cannot immediately see is identity restructuring happening beneath the surface. Tiny disciplines compound invisibly before they become visible externally. Just like neglect compounds invisibly before disaster appears. Nobody becomes unhealthy overnight. Nobody becomes financially trapped overnight. Nobody loses themselves overnight. It happens gradually. And recovery happens gradually too. That's the uncomfortable part. Transformation is usually boring before it becomes beautiful. There's a reason empty distractions feel so addictive. They temporarily remove self-awareness. For a few moments, people stop hearing the voice inside themselves. The voice reminding them how disconnected they feel, how lost they feel, how much time has passed. But distractions never solve the pain. They only delay the confrontation. Eventually, silence returns. And when it does, reality feels heavier. This is why disciplined people often appear calmer emotionally. Not because their lives are easier, because they are no longer constantly escaping themselves. They face life directly. And strangely, direct confrontation creates peace faster than avoidance ever does. The Stoics believed suffering increases when resistance increases. Modern psychology often confirms the same pattern. The more people avoid discomfort, the more fragile they become emotionally. That's why discipline builds resilience. Not because discipline removes pain, because it increases your capacity to carry pain without collapsing. And adulthood requires that capacity, especially for people carrying families, responsibilities, aging parents, financial pressure, and silent emotional burdens nobody fully understands. Life eventually asks every person the same question. Can you remain steady when things become difficult? Discipline becomes part of that answer. There's also something masculine about discipline that modern culture rarely explains properly. Not aggression, not dominance, responsibility. The ability to carry weight without constantly needing external validation. Many men suffer quietly because they feel emotionally trapped between exhaustion and expectation. They are expected to provide, to remain composed, to endure pressure silently. And over time, many lose connection with purpose itself. They survive, but they stop feeling alive. This is why small disciplines become psychologically powerful for men especially. Because discipline restores agency. Even tiny acts matter. Making your bed, keeping your word, training your body, managing your finances, reading instead of numbing yourself. These acts seem ordinary, but emotionally, they rebuild structure. And structure creates stability. Without structure, people drift. And drifting destroys meaning slowly. A drifting life becomes reactive. A disciplined life becomes intentional. That difference changes how a person experiences existence itself. One of the saddest moments in life is realizing how many years were spent waiting emotionally instead of building intentionally. Waiting to feel ready. Waiting to feel confident. Waiting for circumstances to improve. Meanwhile, time continues moving without sympathy. That realization hits differently after 40, because youth creates the illusion of endless chances. But eventually, people begin measuring life differently, not in years ahead, in years remaining. And suddenly the small disciplines no longer feel small. They feel urgent, not frantic urgency, sacred urgency. The understanding that your remaining years deserve your full presence. Not half-hearted survival, not endless distraction. Presence, purpose, self-respect. Many people fear aging because they associate it with decline. But aging becomes terrifying mainly when people feel they wasted themselves. Aging with peace feels different, because peace comes from alignment, from knowing, I showed up for my life. Not perfectly, but honestly. The beautiful thing about discipline is that it does not require perfection. Perfection destroys people psychologically. It creates shame cycles. One mistake becomes an excuse to quit completely. Discipline is different. Discipline says, continue, even after failure, especially after failure, because consistency matters more than emotional performance. A person who returns repeatedly becomes stronger than a person who relies on emotional intensity. This is why disciplined people recover faster from setbacks. Their identity is no longer attached to temporary emotions. They understand something profound. Missing once is an event. Quitting is an identity. That distinction changes everything. Life will interrupt you. Pain will interrupt you. Exhaustion will interrupt you. But returning matters. Returning repeatedly builds resilience stronger than motivation ever could. And maybe that's the deepest truth hidden inside Jim Rohn's words. Simple disciplines are not simple because they are easy. They are simple because life itself eventually reveals the same patterns over and over again. Health matters. Attention matters. Time matters. Self-control matters. Consistency matters. The fundamentals never stop mattering. People search endlessly for complicated solutions because simple truths feel emotionally unsatisfying. But reality remains stubbornly simple. Your life changes when your daily behaviors change. Not your intentions, not your fantasies, your behaviors, repeated daily. That's where destiny quietly forms. Not in dramatic declarations. In repetition. Imagine two versions of the same person. One spends 10 years choosing comfort repeatedly. The other spends 10 years choosing small disciplines repeatedly. At first, their lives may look almost identical. But eventually, the gap becomes enormous. One develops self-respect. The other develops regret. One builds resilience. The other builds excuses. One creates inner peace. The other creates hidden shame. And the terrifying part is that the difference began through tiny daily choices nobody considered important at the time. That's why this conversation matters. Because many people still believe their life requires one massive breakthrough. It usually doesn't. It requires smaller betrayals ending. That's the real beginning. Not becoming superhuman. Becoming consistent. Quietly. Repeatedly. Until your life starts reflecting the person you once hoped to become. There's a moment that sometimes happens late at night. After the noise fades. After the distractions end. A person sits alone with their thoughts and realizes something uncomfortable. No one is coming to save me. For some people, that realization feels terrifying. For others, it becomes freedom. Because once you stop waiting for rescue, you finally begin building. Slowly. Imperfectly, but honestly. And maybe that is what maturity truly is. Not becoming fearless, not becoming emotionless, but understanding that meaning is built through repeated acts of responsibility, especially when nobody is watching, especially when life feels heavy, especially when results are delayed. That is where self-respect is born, quietly, like most important things in life. So if your life currently feels directionless, if you feel exhausted by your own inconsistency, if regret has started whispering louder lately, do not focus on changing everything overnight. That pressure destroys people. Instead, focus on restoring one discipline. 1. Wake up when you said you would. Take the walk. Read the pages. Save the money. Turn off the distraction. Keep the promise. Not because the action itself is magical, because every completed discipline sends a message to your nervous system. I am rebuilding. And eventually, those messages become identity. Then identity becomes behavior. Then behavior becomes destiny. Years from now, your life will largely reflect what you repeated. Not what you wished for. Not what you talked about. What you repeated. That truth can feel brutal. But it can also feel strangely hopeful. Because it means your future may still be quietly waiting inside the smallest decisions you make tomorrow morning. Not dramatic transformation, simple disciplines, practiced every day. And maybe that's how people finally stop surviving their lives and begin respecting them.